Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Today we'll take a journey to the place where humans first learned how to be collectively unclean. Before there was New York or Rome, where did people live? Çatalhöyük, the first place you had neighbors and their smell. Among 8,000 people and 8,000 types of odor. The first city on earth, Çatalhöyük, where our ancestors officially began a life that was crowded, stifling, and full of cow dung. Clay rooftops, no windows, no front doors. Want to leave your house? You have to crawl out the roof. Every house in Çatalhöyük was connected by rooftops. No streets, no alleys, just a maze of cramped dwellings, like a giant termite nest in damp weather. Before we begin, if you truly find this a nice place to take shelter late at night, please like and subscribe, but only if you really want to. Like the rules of an old tavern, only come in when you need a quiet place. And you know what I love most? Looking at the comments, seeing where you're from and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here, and I see you. Now turn off the lights, turn on a small fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for that soft, gentle hum. The place was called Çatalhöyük, and over 9,000 years ago, it was the first spot where humans gathered. Building house next to house, person next to person, cow next to sleeping pillow. Not because they liked being social, but because they decided to live together, even though they hadn't thought through the sewage system. In Çatalhöyük, nobody had a private room. The entire city was a giant clay beehive. Each house a little square, no front door, just a hole in the roof for you to crawl in and out. Like life was an ancient plumbing game. No doors, no locks, no concept of ask before entering. All privacy was left to the judgment of the bull god. And yes, the bull god was in the corner of the room, chewing his dinner again. You couldn't stroll the streets, because the street was your neighbor's roof. And to visit the house next door, you had to climb onto your own roof, then shuffle sideways like a socially awkward cat. On the rooftop, wind brushed over slabs of drying meat, the fatty scent having transformed into a warning signal. Every crevice was a symphony of ash, sweat, and the faint hope that humanity wouldn't go extinct from its own gases. Here, the day began with the breath of cows and ended with the crackling of fire beside a pile of warm ashes, which might be a kitchen or an old toilet. You ate and slept with 8,000 other people, smelled each other, breathed the same air, and when someone passed away, they were buried right beneath the floor, close enough that you could say good night and actually mean it. And the strange thing was, even though it was cramped, stifling, with no privacy, people stayed. They didn't leave, because for the first time, humans stopped running and tried living together with the smell, the mess, and each other's morning breath. Living together meant inhaling someone else's scent and not leaving. Learning to love through your nose, not your words. The first city of humanity didn't start with glory. It began with sweat, cow dung, children's voices, and a hazy dream that living like this might actually be the future. Feel like your apartment is cramped? Just remember, at least you don't sleep next to a cow with your great-grandfather chilled beneath your bed. You open your eyes, then your ears, and the first thing you hear is something ticking, tapping, then thumping. Maybe the old lady upstairs grinding grain, or the dead shifting in their sleep. Here, it's hard to tell the difference between the sounds of now and the afterlife. First, the cracked clay ceiling, low enough that if you sit up too fast, you'll reincarnate as a wall. Next, the smell, indescribable, not quite clear, like a symphony of ash, goatskin, human sweat, and a wandering soul. You shift and clack. Your head bumps something round, cold, slightly hollow. You look up. It's a skull, your great-grandfather's skull, hanging on the wall right above where you sleep. Not for decoration, not to scare, but because ancient folks believed ancestors should stay close to witness, protect, and inspect how you chew your porridge. You wonder, maybe he was someone important. No. In Çatalhöyük, anyone who died had the chance to return to the living room. Every household had one. Some had one skull, some had three, some had a full clan, a slow decomposing collection. If you're a guest, don't ask questions. Just smile gently, nod at each skull. Because who knows, you might be sitting in Grandpa's favorite spot. They didn't let loved ones rest alone underground, but dug them up after a few years, took the skull, wiped it with some leaves, and hung it in the warmest place, above your head. The skull wasn't just a relic, it was a prehistoric security camera, a wall-hanging history book, and sometimes a hook for your goatskin cloak. You try turning your head to the left and see the old neighbor lady blowing ash through a hole in the wall. To the right, the neighbor's baby is wailing, the sound piercing the wall like a flesh and bone fire alarm. Above you, chickens fighting hens. Beneath your back, your great-grandfather. You understand one thing. There's no just me here. You live, breathe, and bump elbows with those who once lived and never really left. Strangely, everyone saw this as completely normal. No one screamed, "Give me privacy," because privacy was a luxury, something yet to be invented. In Çatalhöyük, you didn't wake up alone. You woke up with family, both alive and long gone, with noise, smells, memories, and that constant question, is great-grandpa judging my sleeping posture right now? And even if you think that's scary, imagine this. If you died, would you want to be hung on your descendants' wall to see if they're eating porridge correctly, breathing evenly, and not falling for the wrong person? Because sometimes, ancient love didn't come from hugs. It came from silent presence, in the shape of a skull. You open the lid of your gas stove at home, see it spotless, has a spark, a knob, and 4 independent cooking holes. The people of Çatalhöyük don't know what you're talking about. To them, a stove wasn't just for cooking. It was once a toilet, then sprinkled with ash, covered with dirt, and built into a stove for convenience. Welcome to the full utilization mindset of the Stone Age. There are no roads here, no alleys, no numbered address plates. Every house is connected by roofs. In the modern world, you ring a doorbell. In Çatalhöyük, you climb onto the roof and knock on a hole. No ding-dong, just a thump when you fall into someone's porridge pot. Want to visit a neighbor? No knocking, no bell. You crawl onto your own roof, walk across theirs, then drop in through a hole, like a polite cockroach dropping by. And yes, the rooftop is also a local market, a children's playground, a cow slaughterhouse, and sometimes a sneaky place for someone to relieve themselves. This world has no fences, only the limits of one's patience. There's no toilet bowl, no tiles, no air freshener, no exhaust fan, just a small pit where families had a chat with Mother Earth. Done? Sprinkle ash, cover it. A few weeks later, if it seems fine, build a stove on top. You might find it gross, but to the ancients, it was care. They left nothing behind, not even digestive memories. Every handful of ash was a message. We live, we cook, and we waste nothing. You think you have a minimalist interior? The people of Çatalhöyük invented survival-level design. Toilet corner becomes stove. Washing corner becomes pottery area. Floor becomes grave. And the rooftop? The rooftop is everything. Every meal comes with a taste of the past. Not herbs, but the flavor of earth where Uncle Two once sat reflecting. Cooking meat. You're probably frying it right where your great-great-grandpa once dealt with the consequences of too much dried beef. No partitions, no living room, no kitchen, no bathroom. Everything is one, in the unity of smoke, ash, odor, and silent endurance. If you think open space strengthens family bonds, the people of Çatalhöyük were so bonded, you could hear your neighbor's digestion. The ancients didn't complain. They laughed. They lived. They lit fires on the very ground that once held memories. And they looked each other in the eye every day, without messages, without seeing. Because maybe civilization didn't begin with comfort, but with the ability to endure each other, endure smells, endure sounds, endure the lack of privacy, and still share one roof. Still think it's hard to live in a crowded city? Just remember, at least no one's butchering a cow on your rooftop, unless you live on the 5th floor and your neighbor is a prehistoric CrossFit guy. And if you see someone hauling a cow up a ladder, stay calm. You might be witnessing an ancient ritual making a TikTok comeback. Good morning, hungry descendant of the Stone Age. What's for breakfast today? No instant cereal, no iced milk coffee, no gluten-free whole grain toast topped with soft-boiled egg. Instead, you have a bowl of dry wheat porridge, as hard as your ancestors' pride, and a strip of dried meat. No one remembers what animal it's from, only that it's long forgotten how to be fresh. You sit cross-legged by the stove, meaning right on the spot that was a toilet 2 weeks ago. You grab a lump of ash porridge, real ash, not a metaphor, and dip it lightly into a slightly murky liquid in a stone bowl. Don't ask where that water came from. Maybe a stream. Maybe the rock crevice where someone once washed their feet, but you drink because choice is a privilege of the future. No spoon, no portions, just you, the porridge, and the blank stare of your grandpa's skull on the wall, watching you eat like it's an offering. You don't know if that gaze is a blessing or judgment for noisy chewing, but you know one thing. Here, eating is also performance. Every bite of porridge is a message to future generations. This is how I survived without a rice cooker. If you ever said whole grain bread tastes like soggy cardboard, you haven't tried wheat porridge with ash, half-baked, smoke-infused, and proudly indifferent. First bite, as bland as an ex saying we're still friends. Second bite, slightly burnt edges, smoky aroma mixed with the scent of memory-steeped dirt. Third bite, you stop chewing to reflect on the consequences of being born too early in human history. And then the dried meat appears. No one knows where it came from, who left it, or if it's even meat. You take a bite. It feels like gnawing on a piece of time. It doesn't melt, doesn't break, just exists, stoically. Maybe this is why ancient people didn't live long, you think. Not because of illness, but because food made them give up. But no one complains, because breakfast isn't for pleasure. It's a ritual of survival. It's the moment when you and your family, living and deceased, share hunger together. No one leaves the table before finishing. No one posts food photos online. Only chewing sounds, breathing, and sometimes a belly rumble like war drums. And don't forget, after eating, you wash your dishes with sand and ash. Then store the leftovers in a stone jar, or stuff them into the attic next to the dried dead cat. And yes, sometimes food is forgotten until it becomes a new dish. Not Korean fermentation, more like fermented regret. Don't ask why there's a cat. Don't ask why it's dry. Finally, you stretch. Your stomach just full enough to carry on another day among smoke, ash, people, and cows. You don't complain, because in Çatalhöyük, eating means still living, and being alive means there's still hope. And if tomorrow your breakfast feels too bland, too cold, too tasteless, just remember, your ancestors ate ash porridge and thyme meat, and they still survived long enough to make you. So don't skip breakfast, and don't complain anymore. There are things that are invisible, but hit your face like a slap with a wet sock left out for 3 days. That's the smell of Çatalhöyük. You don't need a map, no GPS. Just open your nose, and you'll know exactly where you are. Smell doesn't need translation. Smell doesn't need a dictionary. It says, people live here. It says, there's old fish from last week here. And sometimes it whispers, there's history here. The smoky scent of slow-burning fires, overhung meat, ash, damp earth, human. All blending together like an uninvited symphony, but one everyone hears. That is the smell of life, unfiltered. Living with 8,000 people, no drainage pipes, no bathrooms. What holds you together? Not friendship, not trust, but shared biological odor. You love someone. You love their smell too, or learn to live with it. You know the smell of cows. Now imagine that smell when it rains, when it's hot, when cows are stressed, and when cows sleep with you. The ancients didn't just live with animals, they lived inside their smell. It wasn't just endurance, it was a natural warning system. Stronger smell, more stressed cow. Something weird's about to happen. And sometimes, the smell of poop saves your life before an earthquake. And after a while, they called it nose familiarity. Modern science says, smell is the sense most closely tied to deep memory. So if you walk into someone's home in Çatalhöyük and suddenly cry, it might be, your ancestor died there, or someone just roasted something they shouldn't have roasted. No air purifiers, no fans, no windows, just a hole in the roof for smoke, odor, and lost spirits to float to the sky. And sometimes drift into the neighbor's place. Smell doesn't lie, doesn't wear makeup, doesn't use filters. Smell is the living proof of a community that is existing, cooking, living, loving, and wrestling with digestion. And the strange part, smell keeps people staying. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's familiar. If you can endure someone's smell, it means you're learning to love them without asking them to change. So if you walk into a place and the smell's not right, don't leave just yet. You might be sniffing the foundation of a civilization. Or maybe someone in that house just made fermented rice cake with rotten eggs. Hard to tell, but worth remembering. If you think art means galleries, Baroque music, and coconut milk lattes, forget it. Modern artists need inspiration, deadlines, and grants. Çatalhöyük artists only needed ash, blood, and a reason to keep existing. Maybe they didn't know what to draw, but they knew. Empty walls mean empty hearts. Because in Çatalhöyük, art is when you draw a 3-eyed flying cow on the wall, and no one questions it. You walk into a room, dim light, cracked clay walls, and boom, a leopard-headed person dancing next to two naked women. You don't know if this is a fertility ritual, a dream retold in paint, or just a kitchen smoke-induced slip of the hand. Almost every house has a real bull skull hung on the wall, not because they liked it, but because the bulls symbolize strength, fertility, and long-lasting food. Ancient people didn't paint gods with halos. They painted bulls, bull-headed people, people giving birth to bulls, and bulls staring at you from the void. Some believed bulls were the bridge between this world and the afterlife. Some believed bulls tasted better if you painted them before cooking. No one agreed, but everyone agreed. Bulls were important. There were special rooms filled with spirals, black marks, wide eyes, arms reaching out. No one can explain them. Modern people call that spiritual. I call it results of 6 hours inhaling smoke in a sealed room. They had no paper, no pens, no colored chalk, only dirt, animal blood, ash, and a strange kind of determination. You draw with bone, color with mud, and hang your work right next to your bed for your ancestors to review. A bull head could be a totem, a pillow, a spiritual anchor, and a coat hook. Art here isn't for display. It's to keep life meaningful when everything around you reeks and suffocates. My answer, yes, maybe, or no. Maybe it's belief. Maybe it's chronic ash poisoning syndrome. No one's sure. All we know is it made people keep drawing, praying, and dreaming. So if you've ever scribbled something in sadness, you and the people of Çatalhöyük aren't so different. Have you ever slept with a secret lying right beneath your back? In Çatalhöyük they did that every night, except the secret had bones. And its name was great-grandfather. You sleep on memory foam, cool pillows, soothing white noise. The people of Çatalhöyük slept on dirt floors with ancestors below, a stove beside them, and occasionally chickens jumping across their faces. Sleeping there, you don't dream. You engage directly with legacy. The people of Çatalhöyük didn't build cemeteries. They didn't send the deceased out to far-off fields. They buried their loved ones right beneath the floor, so close that if you dropped your porridge bowl, it might hit great-grandpa's forehead. The house was like a multi-layered cake. On top, porridge, fire, chickens. Below, a generation of silence. Whenever someone died, they dug a small hole right in the middle of the room, placed the body in a curled fetal position, as if preparing to be reborn on a sunny day, if the weather cooperated. You still ate on that ground. You roasted meat beside it. You slept every night, right above the face of the one you once called father. No grave, no headstone, just memory, and the scent of ash soaked into every brick. The ancients didn't separate life and death. They didn't mask grief with plastic flowers and funeral songs. They kept loved ones close, not to cling, but to remind. We once lived together, and now we still do. After a few years, once the soft parts turned to dry parts, they dug up the skull, repainted it, and placed it on a high shelf in the room. That was an honor, an invitation for ancestors to join in the cave-era Netflix binge. Some skulls were repainted red. Some were decorated with seashells to look more soulful. And whenever there was a feast, they dusted the skulls before setting the table. No loneliness, no coldness, just the feeling that you're part of a current, even if it smells strong, even if the night feels cramped. But you know for sure you're not left behind. So if you've ever cried alone in the middle of the night, Remember, the ancients never slept alone. They always had someone under the pillow. And if you can't sleep tonight, don't play a podcast. Don't hug a teddy bear. Just imagine great-grandpa under the floor, nodding and saying, "Sleep, child. You've got antelope to hunt tomorrow." If you think spirituality is about quiet places, candlelight, and the gentle scent of incense, then in Çatalhöyük, spirituality is the smell of earth, the smell of fire, and other, less pleasant smells. Fire wasn't just for warmth, for cooking. It was also a symbol, a deity, a middle realm between the living and the dead. You see smoke rising thick from the ashes. That's the breath of ancestors floating to the sky, carrying untold stories. A pleasant aroma wasn't always pleasant. At certain rituals, they burned wood, ash, and the scent of hardship itself. That smell was so dense you couldn't mistake it, but it was the community's spiritual map. Those strange drawings on the walls, animal-headed people, three-eyed creatures, bizarre spirals. Were they faith, or just side effects of inhaling smoke all day? Some believed it was prayer. Some believed it was how they kept their minds from unraveling. Death wasn't the end. It was a part of life. The ancients believed that souls never really left the house, so they placed the dead right beneath the floor. So every step was a reminder of eternal connection. You can't separate belief from smell. Every breath you take is a blend of the sacred and the mundane, of life and death, of love and fear. If you've ever felt lonely, remember. Thousands of years ago, people were lonely too, but they learned to send love through indescribable scents. You're living in a village with no front doors, no streets, no bathrooms, no air conditioning. The roof leaks. Cows sleep by the stove. Children scream all day. And you still stay. These days, people leave the city for the countryside to find peace. The people of Çatalhöyük had no cities to leave, and their countryside was loud like a market, smelly like a barn, but full like a heart. Beneath the floor lies great-grandfather. On the wall, paintings of ancestors. In the kitchen, the scent of every meal since you started remembering. The smell of dark ash, burnt porridge, sun-dried hides. Like the background music whose name you never recall, but when it plays, it feels like home. Leaving means taking your body, but leaving behind your spirit, your scent, your memory. You know how the rooftop curves. You know when the hen will lay eggs. You know what time the limping cow next door makes noise. This place is loud, hot, uncomfortable, but it's familiar. You have no tech, no modern hunting tools, but you have ash, porridge, and a community that doesn't let anyone go hungry. To stay is to eat together. To leave is to eat alone. The cow's bellow is your clock, the fire crackling, your mother making porridge, the sound of crying children, the first symphony of memory. Elsewhere, noise is a nuisance. Here, noise is proof of life. It tires you, but it also makes you less lonely. No one tolerated Çatalhöyük. They simply got used to each other, used to the place, and used to themselves, here. Maybe they didn't know what it meant to leave. No Google Maps, no concept of finding somewhere new. But maybe they stayed because they knew where there's the most smell is where the most people have lived. No chronicle tells us clearly how Çatalhöyük ended. No invading army, no massive drought. No, that year the sky flashed and the villagers vanished. Only one thing is certain. Ash. An unusually thick layer of ash covering floors, wall paintings, even bones. Not just cooking ash. It was ash of something bigger, of rooftops, of hopes, of the last time someone lit a fire together. Some archaeologists believe that when they left the village, they burned their own homes, not out of anger, but because if we can't live here anymore, then no one else should. A way to end things, a ritual, a farewell, a feast, a forgotten flame, a windy night, a dry roof. Maybe everything ended just because someone left embers under the straw. And when the whole village went up in flames, no one had time to paint the final picture. There were no bodies in that ash, no dead, just collapsed walls, scorched tools, half-burnt grains, which means they ran, or they'd already left. But they left everything as if they'd return tomorrow. Beneath the ash, there are still handprints on walls, still half-burnt chicken bones, still a stove someone lit yesterday and never came back to. If you've ever stood in an old house where no one lives anymore and still smelled your mother, heard the laugh of someone who's gone, then you understand Çatalhöyük, a place with no people, but never truly empty. The wheel, the great invention, ignored for 300 years. The oldest indirect evidence of wheel-based movement is found in the form of miniature clay wheels north of the Black Sea, before 4,000 years before the Common Era. From the mid-4th millennium before the Common Era onward, this evidence is condensed across Europe in the form of toy cars, depictions, or ruts. In Mesopotamia, representations of wheeled chariots are found on clay drawings in the Eana district of Uruk, part of the Sumerian civilization dated to around 3500 to 3350 before the Common Era. In the second half of the 4th millennium, evidence of wheeled vehicles appears almost simultaneously in the north, the Maykop culture, and South Caucasus, early Kurgan culture, and Eastern Europe, Cucuteni Tripilian culture. A depiction of a wheeled vehicle appears between 3631 and 3380 on the Bronices pot excavated from a settlement of the funnel-beaker culture in southern Poland. In nearby Olzanica, a 2.2-meter wide door was constructed to allow vehicle access. Imagine this. You're standing in a scorched land, full of dust, rubble, and some sweaty potters, sweating in silence. We're in Mesopotamia, around 3500 before the Common Era. More precisely, in Uruk, where the first potter's wheel was invented. Not for movement, but to spin around an axis, marking the beginning of all human rolling history. There are no carts here, no saddles, no grab rides, just humans, and earthenware pots as heavy as unconfessed sins. Amidst this scene, a potter, whose name we don't know, so let's call him Gibble, is spinning his pottery wheel by hand, when suddenly he stops. His eyes land on the spinning wheel, and he softly says, "This thing spins, and spins beautifully." He has no idea that he's just accidentally sparked the greatest motion in human history. A wheel, round, even, capable of rolling. But no one knows where it should roll to. Back then, the wheel wasn't a grand invention. It was just a spinning table. It could spin, but not move. Not a transport wheel, but a stationary wheel. Like spinning in your office chair at 3 in the afternoon. Fun, but going nowhere. No one thought of attaching it to anything. That first wheel, tiny, silent, and born too soon. You had a wheel, but nothing for it to serve. No flat roads, no strong axle, no good wood, no animals willing to cooperate. Like inventing an SSD in a world that hasn't discovered computers. Like a great poem in the wrong place. Like a smart person lost in a PTA meeting. It had potential, but no one saw it. And so, the first circle of humanity was born in a world still fiercely loyal to shoulders. People still carried things on their backs, pulled by hand, balanced on bamboo poles, because simply they were used to the suffering. Just like us, who sometimes accept back pain instead of learning to use wheels. And so it lay there, next to the pottery bench, like an idea too good for people to understand. Like a dream mocked not because it was wrong, but because it came too soon. While the world still hunched under burdens. And you know the funniest part? Humans invented the wheel before they invented the vehicle. You know what's truly cruel? Not being mocked, not being destroyed, but being treated like you never existed. That was the fate of the first wheel. It wasn't thrown away. It wasn't smashed. It was just glanced over like a leftover detail. People saw it, even acknowledged it could roll, then said, "Yeah, neat. Let's just leave it there." And then 300 years passed. In those 300 years, humanity kept living, hauling, suffering. They built temples by hand, dragged stones with ropes, tugged boats with people. The wheel remained. It could roll, but wasn't rolled. Like a beautiful song no one ever pressed play on. We often think, if something's good, it'll naturally be used. But the truth is, not all great inventions are welcomed. Not everyone talented is given a chance. And not all potential gets activated at the right time. The wheel didn't lack capability. It lacked context. The wheel needed more than roundness. It needed a whole technical ecosystem to thrive. A spindle that didn't wobble, hard wood that didn't crack, roads flat enough to not send it rolling into a ditch, and most importantly, precision tools to build it all. Something ancient carpenters still struggled to achieve with stone axes and rope. And even if the materials existed, the next question was, who would pull that cart? At the time, oxen were for rituals, donkeys for carrying water. No one thought to strap wheels to a cart and let animals do the pulling. The idea of animal traction was still an unsolved riddle, when everyone still believed human strength was infinite. No roads, where to roll. No axle, what to attach to. No need, what problem to solve. You might be a spark, but if the world is all wet stones, you're just a flicker snuffed out as soon as it appears. Imagine this, a circle, lying there, spinning beneath a potter's hand, waiting for someone bold enough to look and think, we should let this thing go further. It kept spinning, never tired, never rebelled, never cried out, like a singer practicing alone in an empty room. No audience, but still singing. The wheel didn't roll, but it never stopped spinning. But no one thought that way. Because when you're used to carrying loads by back, pulling with hands, straining your neck, you're not just used to suffering, you begin to fear what's new. In Sumerian society back then, everything was dictated by custom, ritual, and hierarchy. Any innovation, even the wheel, raised suspicion. We've lived this way for generations. Why change? How do we know it won't ruin our fields? And so, they looked at the wheel as something clumsy, troublesome, and too new to trust. And so, the invention that would change the world was shelved. No cries, no explosions, just silence stretched across 3 centuries. From around 3500 before the Common Era, when the wheel was just a potter's turntable, to around 3100 to 3000 when it was finally attached to a cart. A long, dark stretch passed where humanity had no idea what it held in its hands. There was no thunder, no dramatic soundtrack, no grand declaration like, "From now on we shall roll." Just an ordinary day. The weather was hot, the ground was soft, people were tired, and someone, nameless, was so sore in the back, they decided to try attaching that circular thing to a box. Maybe it was a salt trader. Maybe it was a farmer who had to haul grain across sand dunes. Maybe it was a child playing and accidentally invented the first vehicle in human history. We don't know. History doesn't record the name. It only records the result. The first cart was born. 2 wheels, 1 axle, and a gentle push. And then it rolled. But not like the wheels you see today. The first wheel was solid wood. No hollow center, no spokes, no independent spin. It was fused to the axle. If you wanted the wheel to turn, you had to turn the entire axle. Heavy, slow, squeaky. But it rolled, and that was enough to change history. Before that could happen, one more element was needed: animal power. People had domesticated oxen and donkeys for thousands of years, but had never thought to assign them the task of pulling. Until one day someone stopped and said, "If an ox can pull a plough, why can't it pull a cart too?" And when a wheel was attached to a frame, and a docile animal agreed to walk in a straight line, pushing the wheel forward, history officially shifted course. And can you imagine? Once a wheel actually rolled, everything began to change. Small villages started having paths. Dirt roads were cleared so carts wouldn't get stuck. Merchants visited more places because they didn't have to carry things anymore. The wheel didn't just lighten people's backs. It connected settlements, turned markets into cities, and cities into networks. People used it to carry pottery, then to transport food, then to haul weapons, and finally, to rebuild the world. It didn't arrive as a grand invention. It arrived as a question. Why don't we try? And so, the wheel, after 300 years of sitting like an unused trinket, was invited out of the pottery workshop, onto the road, and it never looked back. From then on, every major civilization revolved around the wheel. But don't think it spread like a TikTok trend. It took hundreds more years for other civilizations to adopt the wheel. In Egypt, wheeled carts weren't really used until the Hyksos brought them around 1600 years before the Common Era. In China, it wasn't until the Shang Dynasty that wheels became common in daily life. The wheel rolled, but never rushed. It quietly conquered the world, 1 meter at a time. The Sumerians used carts to attend divine rituals. The Egyptians used war chariots to conquer new lands. The Greeks and Romans turned the wheel into a legend on the battlefield. But don't forget, that very wheel had once been forgotten for 300 years. Just like you. Maybe you haven't been chosen, haven't been seen, haven't been used the right way. But when your moment comes, you'll roll. And just like that ancient wheel, after 3 centuries of silence and waiting, you'll hear the world say its first words to you. Thanks. My back really needed that. And when you roll, the world will follow. The wheel wasn't a sudden invention that instantly changed the world. There were no applause, no ceremonies of honor. But from the day the wheel was actually used, a gentle ripple began to roll out across civilizations. And like a stone dropped into a still pond, it changed everything around it. First, the wheel changed the way we transported things. The Sumerians began using carts to carry pottery and trade goods. The Egyptians used chariot wheels, making war faster and more strategic. The Romans elevated the wheel into a mighty weapon on the battlefield, turning it from a transport tool into a symbol of warfare and entertainment. And so, an invention born in silence ended up changing how people fought, communicated, traded, and even lived. The wheel also became the pathway for trade and civilizational connection. The Silk Road, a route stretching across Eastern and Western civilizations, linking China to Rome. The Roman Empire, with its sophisticated road systems, enabled easy transport of goods and troops. Ancient empires began using the wheel to move objects, armies, and even culture. Exchanges between civilizations, once painfully slow, became faster than ever. The wheel didn't just move physical things, it moved ideas, culture, and people. And once civilizations realized the wheel's importance, a chain of changes in engineering, technology, and even philosophy began. Irrigation. Wheeled systems helped transport water, revolutionizing agriculture. Mechanical industry. The wheel launched early machines, paving the way for efficiency and scale. Freight transport. The wheel turned trade from a backbreaking chore into a continuous business, regardless of geography. But do you know the most important thing? The wheel didn't just change materials, it changed the human mindset. When you see a cart rolling across red dirt roads, you don't just see an object, you see the future. And when you see a war chariot rolling over sand, you don't just see a battalion, you see the footsteps of an empire. That's transformation not just in space but in time. Because of one wheel, everything became possible. In the same way, we today may sometimes feel like unused wheels. But remember, the wheel rolls when the moment is right. And if you feel like your path hasn't appeared yet, you just need to wait for the right time. Have you ever thought that the things repeating over and over in life could hold a great lesson? Those seemingly meaningless circles, those slow, aimless movements. The wheel, for its first 300 years, wasn't listened to. No one saw it as a tool that could change the world. But then, 300 years later, when someone was tired enough, creative enough, determined enough, the wheel began to move. From that moment on, it didn't just change the way we traveled, it changed how we thought about time and space. Back then, when only your legs carried everything, time was the long road you had to walk with your own strength. When you walked, you paid time with every step. With the wheel, everything became faster, easier. Time was no longer tied to exhaustion, but to speed and efficiency. Just like the wheel, sometimes we have to go through a long period of waiting, have to find the path we're meant to take, have to wait until we're truly ready. You might feel like a wheel, not yet used the right way, not yet seen at the right time. But remember, even a wheel had to wait 3 centuries before it could roll. So don't be too worried if you feel like you're standing still. Everything will come in time. When you're patient enough, strong enough, subtle enough to recognize your true value. And when the wheel rolls, nothing can stop it. The world will have to change in its rhythm, just like you. When the right time comes, you'll roll, and the world will follow. The wheel isn't just a tool for movement, it's an image of patience, of those moments of waiting before everything begins to shift. Just remember that everything has its time, and when you start moving, the world will have to follow. End of chapter. When a circle rolls, it doesn't just move in one direction, because it comes back around, drawing its own path. And in the end, we'll finally know what we need and where we need to go. General Boudica. A woman with only a fiery heart and indomitable strength dared to stand up against the greatest empire of her time. She wore no golden crown, nor dwelled in grand castles. Instead, she was Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, a woman with blazing red hair and cold, piercing eyes, an unyielding fighter who challenged the mighty Roman Empire. But the question arises, how could a seemingly small woman, armed only with a determined heart, stand against a vast empire like Rome? How could she transform suffering into power, defiance into victory? Boudica was not a queen of pomp and glory. She was a mother, a wife, driven to the brink of humiliation and injustice. After her husband, Prasutagus, died, the Romans not only seized their land, but blatantly ignored his will, publicly flogged Boudica, and violated her daughters. No one asked whether she felt pain when her children were dragged by Roman soldiers. But she did not wail. She rose. And from that moment on, history changed its color. Those brutal acts ignited a fire of righteous rage within Boudica, an unquenchable flame. She refused to stand by and watch her people invaded and stripped of their right to live. That is how Boudica became a symbol of resistance. She called upon neighboring tribes, challenged the formidable Roman army, and led them through early victories that struck fear into their enemy. Behind each win lay a tale of unwavering resolve, courage, and the determination to never yield. So how did such a woman, armed only with inner fortitude, stand against a mighty empire? Boudica's journey, born from cruelty, reveals the power of resilience and the fight for justice. Her story isn't just about war and battles. It's a journey of how she turned suffering into strength, rage into a grand uprising. A warrior queen without a crown or armies, but with such formidable spirit she struck fear into the Roman heart. Could a beaten, stripped mother lose everything, become an empire's nightmare? If so, how did she do it? That journey began the moment she stood, not just for herself, but for a nation suffocating under oppression. And that is where the true story truly begins. Before Boudica became a symbol, she was a wife. A woman content to sit by the hearth each evening, braiding her daughter's hair and sharing stories of ancient forest gods. A patient mother, tapping gently on her children's door each morning, reminding them to bring their acorn talismans. A quiet wife, tending their home, caring for a husband busy with tribal councils and emissary missions to Rome. Her life wasn't legendary, but it was peaceful enough that when it ended, she fully understood what had been stolen. A mother, a woman from a cold land, living in a world shaped by men and swords. She was not born for battle. She didn't grow up wielding a blade or thirsting for blood. Boudica's early life was defined by duty to her tribe, her husband, her daughters, and the faint belief that peace could be maintained with humility. Her husband, Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, was no weakling, but he understood that no tribe, however fierce, could stand alone against Rome. So rather than resist, he chose survival, to sign treaties, swear fealty, and maintain Iceni lands as autonomy under Roman rule. In his will, he wisely divided his estate between his two daughters and the Roman emperor, a gesture meant to secure Roman respect. But the Romans respected no one. As soon as Prasutagus died, tax collectors swept in like a cold storm. No courtesy remained, no promises kept. Romans tore up his will, declared Iceni lands Roman property. Boudica protested. She stood, not with a sword, but with her voice. as Queen of Britannia. They answered with whips. Leather scourges sharp as blades, soaked in stale blood, rained down on her back, methodical, unhurried, cold, as though following a ritual repeated hundreds of times. They bound her in the market square before indifferent officials. They struck. Blood soaked through her garments. The British earth was cold, but her back burned. Each lash didn't just tear flesh. It tore apart her dignity and tore loose her honor. And before her eyes, the Roman soldiers raped her daughters. This wasn't mere humiliation. It was a declaration of war. Some wounds make a life silent. But some wounds, like Boudica's, transform a mother into a warrior. She didn't sob. She didn't beg. She didn't commit suicide like Roman nobles would to preserve honor. She stood. Blood had dried on her back, but her eyes blazed, not because she sought rebellion, but because she had no other choice. That was the moment of destiny. Boudica, the woman humiliated, would turn her personal suffering into the roar of a dispossessed nation. And in the silent Britannic night, the first footsteps of a rebellion stirred, softly, slowly, but unstoppable now. Across the way, within Roman barracks, lights burned. Officials raised goblets and mocked after a day humiliating a barbaric woman. One scoffed, "No big deal. What can a woman from these lands even do?" But what they didn't know was, they didn't just beat one woman. They struck at the deepest pain of a mother. And they had accidentally awakened a fury that even the Roman Empire would one day pay for. Because you don't beat a mother past her breaking point. And when that happens, history is no longer safe. The next morning, Britannia lay in mist. Crows cawed atop the priest's wooden posts. Roman soldiers had withdrawn, leaving behind not just Boudica's wounds, but a land fracturing beneath their feet. Boudica had not slept. She sat by the embers, hands clasped around the blood-stained fabric of her daughter. No one dared approach, not because she wept, but because she didn't. Some pains need no words. They sink into the flesh, the breath, the silence. At first light she rose. No sword, no spear, only her voice, but this time no longer soft. It shattered like heated stone. The Romans thought they broke me. They were wrong. I have never stood stronger. Word spread among the Iceni tribe. The queen was whipped, the princesses violated. Elders grasped ancestral staffs. Youths rehoned hunting blades. Even those who once bowed to Rome now stood tall. At Lentos, a frail old man, former royal guard, hobbled behind the house and unearthed an axe buried for 30 years. He cleaned it with his wool sleeve and sighed. "The last time I used it, my wife was alive. This time, for my grandchild." In a nearby village, a young woman, whose brother had been taken by Romans and never seen again, quietly burned a leaf, drawing the Roman helmet upon it. The flame danced small, but her eyes never blinked. No order called forth their wrath. That night, in a small tent at the forest's edge, Boudica cradled her youngest. The little girl still trembled, eyes puffy from grief and fear. "Mother, will you take revenge?" she whispered, voice barely faltering. Boudica shook her head, pressing her hand to her daughter's shoulder to hold back tears. "No, I will reclaim what they thought we lost forever." Her daughter asked no more, but from that moment on, her gaze was brave. They were angry because they understood. If today is the queen, then tomorrow, who will they be? Boudica travelled from village to village. There was no call for rebellion. She simply told the truth, plain, unwavering, of what had happened. And wherever she went, silence gave way to the crackle of fire, the clasp of hands, the vow. If her blood sparked it, our blood will carry it onward. This was no longer the story of an insulted woman. This was the awakening of a nation that had endured too long, a nation that had believed Roman promises, offered gifts, signed treaties. Now they understood. Peace cannot be bought with submission. It comes through standing. And Boudica, the mother, the wife, the woman who once sat by the hearth braiding her daughter's hair, had become the first flame. A flame that just weeks later would burn Londinium to its core. Burn the pride of the mightiest empire in the world. All from one misty morning. One woman standing up. One simple sentence. I fear no more. Morning mist shrouded the forest, but that sunrise felt unlike any other. Softer, yet deeper. The trees stood still, but the air shivered, as if Mother Britannia herself exhaled and awakened with Boudica. No gongs of war, no grand oath. But for the first time, footpaths from village to village were trodden in silence, carrying that fire within. Britannia had listened, and now it was answering. People often think uprisings begin with drums and banners, but Boudica's revolt began from mud. Mud clinging to the feet of men leaving the village at dawn, carrying picks in one hand and axes in the other. Mud stuck to the hems of women's skirts as they led their children to the gathering place. Mud soaked into old wounds and turned into new scars named freedom. No uniforms, no war horses, no horns, no drums. Some carried picks instead of axes. Some bent plowshares into spears. A child walked barefoot, cheeks smudged with soot after rolling beside the hearth to slip away from his mother. They wore no armor. They wore mourning. Mourning for the dead, and for themselves, if they did not live to return tomorrow. But Boudica had something stronger than all of that. A people ready to die for her. From the Iceni to the Trinovantes, from the Catuvellauni to the Corialtovi, thousands who had never met stood together. They did not need to know each other's names. They only needed to know. They shared hatred for Rome. Boudica didn't shout slogans. She walked among them, eyeing each man, gently resting her hand on the shoulder of 15-year-olds holding swords for the first time, nodding at older veterans who had endured 3 seasons of Roman punishment. If today you fight, she said, it is not for fame, but so your children need not bow. The first city burned was not Londinium. It was Camulodunum, the Roman capital in Britannia. They did not come to occupy, they came to erase. The emperor's temple was burned. The bronze statue of Claudius toppled in the square. Roman citizens who once mocked the Celts now begged for mercy. No one gave it. After Camulodunum, a boy not yet 17, holding a spear for the first time, sat beside the body of the Roman soldier he had killed. His hands trembled, his eyes filled with tears. Someone asked, "Why? We've won." He shook his head, whispering, "Mother, I did it, but why am I not happy?" Nearby, another warrior gazed at Claudius's fallen statue. He did not cheer. He wept, not from sorrow, but because for the first time, he truly believed the shackles could be broken. The Romans panicked. They had never seen a band of so-called barbarians organized so effectively. Each Roman settlement in Boudica's path disappeared. Her army advanced like a flood, not led by king or queen, but propelled by unfettered pain. And Boudica, riding ahead, brandishing the only spear she carried, her memory. When her forces approached, the Romans fled. They knew Boudica did not come to negotiate. They knew she was not the woman of last year. They knew those who stayed would not return. Londinium was engulfed in flames. The people cheered. They embraced. Some screamed hoarsely. Others danced in the smoke, raising handfuls of hot ash like trophies. But Boudica did not smile. A warrior asked, "We've won, Queen." She did not answer him. She stared into the distance, where dawn mist still hung over the fields. Not yet. Rome has not been defeated. They are only retreating to regroup. The wind tousled the tattered standard. Flames still soared, but the cheers fell silent. No foundations remained, no trade port, only ash, and the silhouette of a woman on horseback, silently observing the rising blaze. In just a few short weeks, Boudica, the mother beaten and humiliated, led an army from 0 to 80,000. Not because she was a leader, but because she embodied the eruption everyone had been waiting for. No one expected a woman to strike at an empire's heart, but she did. Before departing Londinium, Boudica had her army halt. Amidst the scorched ashes, she climbed onto a large rock. No calls to arms, no intimidation. Just one sentence, roared like thunder. Who here, if they do not survive tomorrow, will not regret having stood today? All 80,000, from elders to maidens, farmers to hunters, shouted in unison, "No retreat." That oath, unrecorded in books, still echoes through Britannia's woodlands. Each tree heard it. But like any storm, it faced a wall. And just after Boudica's most dazzling victory, disciplined, ruthless Roman legions quietly advanced. Swords already sharpened, strategies sketched in sand. And standing among them, unchanged by fear, was a Roman who did not tremble at Boudica. He awaited her at Watling Street. The road to Watling Street was not paved with flowers. It was paved with ash, bones, and hope. After Londinium, Boudica's army did not pause. No one demanded rest. No one complained of hunger. They were not a moving army. They were a crack spreading through an empire's core. But behind their anger, something was changing. One morning, they halted at the forest's edge. No one spoke. They simply sat, silently sharpening spears, tightening leather ties at their boots. A young warrior smoothed his father's bone charm around his little sister's neck. An elder turned away and scribbled something with charcoal on a stone. No one asked, but everyone understood. A last message. A wind stirred, carrying the scent of metal. The air felt heavy, like a dam about to burst. Before a storm, forests hush, and so did their hearts. A thick silence settled among their ranks. They had won, but no one knew where they were headed. Because everyone knew. If Rome returned, they'd play fair. And then they came. On a field near Watling Street, General Suetonius and his Roman legions waited, not rushed, not panicked. They camped, arranged in an inverted V, backs to the forest, allowing no escape routes. Swords gleamed like cold lake surfaces. Shields stood firm as stone walls. Suetonius did not come to negotiate. He came to end this. Boudica knew it. She stood among her troops, no rallying cry this time. She spoke, through her silence. One hand held the reins tight. The other gripped her old spear, no longer sharp, but weighed by everything she had endured. Before battle, she rode down the lines, her gaze no longer burning. It was horrifyingly calm. "I am a woman," she said, voice steady. "But today, I stand not begging survival, but to fight as a mother to protect her child, as a wife to restore her honor, and as a human being to reclaim the right to be human. A roar burst forth, but the Romans did not flinch. Boudica signaled. 80,000 Celts surged like waves. They yelled, they pressed forward, but Suetonius did not budge. Roman formations held. They waited until the insurgents were close enough. Then, shockingly, they braced shields, thrust spears into chests. Those who fell were left. Those who faltered were trampled. As chaos gripped the Celts, they turned to flee, but they could not escape. Behind them were their wagons, their families, their livestock, their dreams of freedom. Some looked back only to see their sons crying and wounds left untreated. A mother shielded her child as cavalry charged. An old warrior, legs buckling, threw himself to protect 2 grandchildren, eyes fixed as if unable to accept this end. There was no escape. The massacre began. Rome left no witnesses. Even those who surrendered were killed. Those hiding in bushes were burned alive. Blood flowed like rivers. The grass lost all green, and Boudica disappeared into it all. No one knows exactly how she died. Some say she took poison. Some say she died of wounds. Some swear they saw her ride into the woods, never turning back. One thing is certain, her spirit did not die. Though crushed, Boudica's army left a wound Rome would never forget. After that, Romans no longer underestimated Celtic women. They no longer dismissed locals as savages. They understood. A woman, when pushed to the edge, becomes something an empire can't control. People still remember Boudica for her battle, but what made her legendary isn't what she won. It's how she faced what she could never have. Watling Street fell. The Roman blade closed the bloody chapter of the rebellion. But among the ashes, the bodies, the silence, her spirit did not fall. They say, after the massacre, when Romans hunted survivors, a black steed thundered through the forest. On its back rode a woman, blood staining her cloak, but her back straight, and her hand clenched on the spear's shaft. No one dared to stop her. No one caught her. Others say she drank poison, ending her life rather than surrendering. A silent death, but not a defeat, her final declaration of freedom. An old woman in Durnovaria recalled, "That night, I saw a red bird, people-sized, flying over the rooftops. It neither sang nor faltered. The next morning, I heard the queen was gone, and I knew that bird was her. No one can be certain, and that is what made her legend. When no one knows your whereabouts, you can live everywhere." She became the greatest question mark Rome ever received from a single woman. General Suetonius, despite victory, did not celebrate. Right after the battle, he ordered the bodies burned, not out of respect, but so no one in the empire would witness what had happened. The young Roman soldiers, still bloodied, lowered their heads in silence. One named Marcus, returning to camp, whispered to a comrade, "If this is victory, why can't we even smile?" No one answered. Suetonius sat in his tent, penning a report to Rome, hands trembling, the oil lamp flickering out in the breeze. He would spend years suppressing revolts across the land, and eventually be summoned back to Rome. He was never hailed as a conqueror, because everyone knew he had doused the fire, but could not kill the flame. And from that moment, Rome ceased ruling the Celts with brute force. They didn't admit it, but they knew. You can slay an enemy, but a burning spirit, no one can extinguish. Rome began changing. Governors were sent who would bow to the locals. They allowed temples to be rebuilt for Celtic gods and children to learn both Latin and native tongues. Some Celtic nobles, who once held axes to battle, married Roman daughters, not in submission, but for survival. Integration, not out of fondness, but because both sides had tasted enough blood. They began trading, marrying at political tables, using culture to coexist. They understood. A red-haired warrior queen could shake an empire, even if she only lived in memory. And that memory was not recorded by Rome, but passed down by people, by a mother holding her child by the hearth, by an elder sharing stories by the riverside each night. Boudica needed no tomb, no statue. She only needed one thing, that if, one day again, her daughter or granddaughter were dishonored, the world would remember there once was a woman who made an empire retreat. No one remembers her voice anymore. No one knows the path her footsteps once carved. But the image of a red-haired woman, spear in hand, eyes glowing like ember ash in the forest, has transcended every written history. Boudica left no castle, no medals, no bronze statue. What she left behind was pride. The pride of a woman who dared to stand, even when everyone told her to be silent. Some heroes are praised for victory, but Boudica was revered for her refusal to bow in defeat. In foggy Britain, people still erect her likeness, not at moments of triumph, but at the moment she refused to die quietly. The modern world has changed, but whenever a woman says no, when a marginalized community rises for justice, when a mother holds her child and says, "We are not meant to be treated like this," then Boudica lives again. Not everyone is born with glory, but some, when they reach their lowest humiliation, force history to change course. Boudica was one of them. Every year, when the first ferns turn deep crimson, East Anglians quietly place a small branch by stones at the forest's edge. No one calls her name aloud. No one seeks attention. But everyone understands. It's a thank you offered to the past, to a woman who dared to live, to feel pain, to hold her head high. Some say Boudica feared too. She collapsed. She thought of death. She made mistakes, chose the wrong allies, let pain morph into rage. But that made her all the more honorable. Because a hero isn't someone who never falls, but someone who stands again after each fall. Generations later, whenever someone feels too small, too fragile, they remind each other, you don't need to be perfect to be remembered. You only need to refuse to retreat in the face of injustice. A young blacksmith once whispered, "I don't know her face, but when forging my first sword, I etched her name on the hilt." To remind myself, sometimes courage means rising, even when no one believes in you. No one knows where she rests. Maybe in some ancient forest, maybe under the foundations of a modern road, but in people's hearts, she still stands there, spear in one hand, the soul of a once subjugated people in the other. And if you ask, could you defeat Boudica? The answer is, you can kill a human, but not an idea, because that idea has a name, and her name was Boudica. Time has passed. Roman roads that once bore hooves are now overgrown with weeds, and towns burned by Boudica survive only as names in old books. But one thing remains unburied, the image of a woman who dared to say no to tyranny. Boudica's legacy doesn't lie in bronze statues, but in how people remember her. Through countless centuries, the tale of the Celtic warrior queen has been passed down, from mothers telling their daughters by the hearth, from teachers reminding students in history class, from gatherings where the powerless remind each other of the value of pride. A young woman in London once stopped before Boudica's statue by the Thames on a rainy day. She quietly clenched her fists, feeling strength pass down from the past, and whispered, "If she dared to stand, I cannot bow." Boudica has become a timeless example. She didn't need perfection. She didn't need victory. She simply needed to dare to protect what's right, to turn her pain into a flame for an entire nation. Many writers, artists, even social activists have drawn inspiration from Boudica, a symbol of feminism, resistance against injustice, the courage to stand beyond fear. All saw a reflection of themselves in the story of that red-haired queen. When the modern world asks, can an ordinary person change a community's fate? The gentle answer echoes from Boudica's legend. Yes. And it begins with someone daring to say no when everyone else tells them to stay silent. Today, whenever an oppressed community stands up, whenever a vulnerable woman defends herself, whenever a child resists injustice, that is Boudica reborn, even if just for a moment. Boudica's true legacy is not her victories, but her unbroken determination. As long as storytellers remain, inspiration endures, and small hands dare to clench tight, Boudica will live on. Not on thrones, but in every heart that refuses to be silent in the face of injustice. In a modern world flooded with lights, where everything can be swept away in a single news headline, you might ask, does Boudica still matter? The answer is very much. When you turn on your TV and see a woman standing her ground in court to protect her child from injustice, that is Boudica, alive in our time. When a marginalized group refuses to bow and demands their rights from a massive system, that's the spirit of Boudica flowing through their veins. The fight for justice today is no longer swords. It's voices, ballads, the courage to speak truth amid so much silence. Boudica reminds us, not everyone can win, but everyone can choose not to surrender. Justice isn't a privilege for the powerful. It's the right of every person with a conscience. A young girl in the US, feeling lost in a sprawling city, only needs to read about Boudica and know that a woman once dared to confront an empire, to tell herself, I too will not give up. In women's rights movements, campaigns for children's rights, for minority rights, for the vulnerable, there are moments when everything seems too big, the adversaries too strong. But history has shown, when one person dares to start, what seems impossible can become reality. And every time someone stands up, even for a small truth, even just to defend their dignity from injustice, that is Boudica's legacy living on today. The fight for justice continues, and each of us, no matter how small or fearful, even when we want to give up, can become a Boudica for our generation. If you're still here, listening to Boudica's story in a quiet night, know that sometimes history isn't just for remembering. History is where we find ourselves again, where we rediscover faith when we feel too insignificant in this world. Boudica's legacy is not victory or defeat, but a gentle reminder. Anyone can be vulnerable. Anyone has felt pain, fear, the urge to quit. But anyone can choose to stand up, even once, to uphold what's right for themselves and those they love. Boudica was no saint, and not a perfect queen. She was an ordinary woman who endured humiliation, loss, and utter loneliness. And because of that, she truly became an eternal model for all generations. As long as someone dares to say no to injustice, as long as a mother teaches her child to hold on to dignity, as long as someone, in the very smallest moment, stands tall and speaks out for right, then Boudica still lives. That legacy, that example, isn't in textbooks or statues. It lives in every heart. And if one day you feel lost, feel your voice too weak in this world, remember, there once was a woman who rose from suffering, transformed anger into hope, and left the world a lesson that never grows old. You don't need to be a hero. You only need to refuse to be silenced. Sleep well, and don't forget, anyone can be the Boudica of their own story.